the interviewer asked Brandon Johnson as he was about to take office as mayor, how do you grade Chicago public schools? And Brandon Johnson said, my responsibility is not to grade the system. My responsibility is to fund the system. And that, in a nutshell, is the entire problem with the system because you're not talking about what the outcomes are for the children it's supposed to serve. Instead, it's about the outcomes for the people who work in the system. Today, in Chicago public schools, you have more than half of Chicago public school students cannot read at grade level. 75% cannot do math at grade level. Meanwhile, Chicago public schools spends about $30,000 per student per year.
Forged in America. Forged in America.
Welcome to episode 12 of Forged in America. We have a great episode today, as always. I'm Ravin Gandhi with my buddy Al Goldstein. We are entrepreneurs who have built and sold some businesses actually in the city of Chicago, which brings us to our guest today. Our guest is Austin Berg, who is the executive director of the Illinois Policy Institute, also the vice president of the Chicago Policy Center. Austin is an expert on all things Chicago. He has written a book called The New Chicago Way. He also made an unbelievably gripping documentary about the Chicago's teachers union called Local One, which I highly, highly recommend. That's how I kind of got to know Austin. So today we're going to be talking about what's going on in many major blue cities through the lens of the city that I love the most, Chicago. So welcome to Forged in America, Austin Berg.
Thank you, Ravin. You're a natural at this. I love the podcast. Happy to be on.
Well, Austin, you could tell why Ravin does the intros here. That booming radio personality he has.
That's right. I need you at every speech. You have introduced me at speeches before, and you do a great job. So thank you.
That is true. That is true. As many connections that get made about the city of Chicago, I was tweeting during the 2024 election just about Kamala, around the time that Biden had dropped out with the dementia, et cetera. And somehow Austin started retweeting and like DMing me saying, oh my God, people who are kind of migrating from the left to the right are my jam. And so we started, I've actually introduced Austin to probably 50 people or so through some peer-to-peer networks, I think, in Chicago, and he's been a big hit.
My family immigrated to Chicago or to the suburbs of Chicago in the late 80s from the Soviet Union and grew up there. And really, I was in love with the city of Chicago for a long time. And now I'm more in love with the city of Miami and Florida, having made what I call my second immigration. And my whole family moved from Chicago to Miami in COVID in 22. But, I built a lot of businesses in Chicago. We have tons of employees in Chicago. I'm a huge believer in just the idea of trying to preserve that city and improve the city over the long term. But I'd love to hear just kind of like what got you into this role that you're playing in the Chicago Policy Institute and really trying to preserve Chicago.
Well, my love for the city sounds like a very similar story to yours. Mine goes back a little bit further. It was actually in the 1870s. My namesake was a guy named, just a little bit. It was a guy named August Berg. So I'm named Austin. My mom was like, you can't name a kid August. He'll get made fun of horribly. But little did she know I would grow up in sort of the cultural zenith of Stone Cold Steve Austin and Austin Powers. So it totally backfired. Anyway, August came through Chicago in the 1870s from Germany and settled in central Illinois. And Chicago, and there's still a farm there, a Berg family farm that's been there over 150 years. And he came to Chicago at a time where it was pretty much the greatest engine for prosperity and growing the middle class, not just in the Midwest, not just in America, in the history of the world. So from 1870 to 1900, Chicago grew from, I think, 300,000 to 1.7 million people in a 30-year span. It was the fastest growing city in the history of the world.
And what was the catalyst at that time?
It was really taking the abundance of the West, commoditizing it, literally, like grading the grain at the Board of Trade. You guys know at LaSalle and Adams, we birthed that in the city of Chicago, and then doing the arbitrage on shipping times to New York City. So we took sort of the abundance of the hinterland, commodified it in the city, and then traded it. And that's sort of a beautiful American story. It's told in this amazing book, if people are interested, called Nature's Metropolis by William Cronin. It's kind of the economic history of Chicago. And that was why we were such an engine of ingenuity, of immigration, of people climbing the ladder to the middle class, and growing so many businesses here in Chicago. It's a lot different today.
Well, on that point, I mean, I think what we're all just so passionate about is that Chicago has become kind of the butt of so many jokes. Anywhere you go, really, in the country, major cities, or even if you travel overseas, people kind of know that Chicago right now there is, more crime than there used to be. So many people are leaving this city, which is one of the reasons, frankly, that we started this podcast, which is to shine a light on the fact that from a policy perspective, what has been going on in the bluest of cities, and kind of what we want to talk to today is, how is Chicago doing just from an overall economic perspective? And then something I'm so passionate about from an education perspective. And basically, how can we get this city sort of back? Everybody knows Brandon Johnson, our mayor, has, I think, the lowest mayoral approval ratings, really, maybe in the history of the nation. So if you would kind of take the biggest picture, Austin, and say, how is Chicago doing today economically? What's the answer?
I would say Chicago's the greatest American city, and we're the worst governed American city. And the numbers I'm going to talk about today are the result of governance. They're not the result of Chicagoans. You guys know Chicagoans. There's many special things about Chicagoans. They work very, very hard. Not saying people in other cities don't work hard. Chicagoans work very hard, and they are what I like to call allergic to pretension. No one is pretentious. No one is flashy, almost to a fault, but I think it's mostly to our benefit. People really care about, when you're building a business in Chicago, we do not do these sort of like pie in the sky financial projection numbers. It's like cash flow in the door. What are you doing right now? I think that's like a business culture of Chicago that's been that way for so long. So I will preface this by saying, really love Chicago and Chicagoans, and we should be, by all these metrics, the greatest American city.
But
So
by the
yeah.
way, I'll add to that. I think you're totally right. It is unique where you walk down the street, people say hi. My wife kind of makes fun of me for the fact that in Miami and Florida, you have a kind of a Latin culture. It's not always the same. And whenever someone says hi and waves at you, I'm like, oh, look, see that happen.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to share a graph prepared by Austin's organization. This is number of businesses operating in Chicago by year. Okay. And you can see here, it hits a 10-year low. And I'm going to share another one right here. And this one is by neighborhood. And here you can see where I live, the Magnificent Mile, down 51%. This is business licenses. Minus 51, minus 42, minus 41%, all the way down to minus 33. And if you have lack of business licenses and lack of businesses, it's going to drive people, out of the city.
And that was from 2015 to 2024.
That's right. So we've seen a sharp decline in business activity. We're at 1920s population levels in the city of Chicago. So you're seeing much different problems in a place like Miami, Al, where it's like, where do we put all the new people? And there's all this traffic and congestion. Chicago has infrastructure built for 1 million people more than we have right now. And it's a very different challenge. The number of businesses, as Ravin cited, is at a 10-year low. The number of businesses operating in the city. If you look at Millikan Institute, does a great annual sort of best performing cities report that takes into account economic growth, growth of the tech sector, many other many metrics like that. We're now 185th out of 200 large metros. And we just saw our lowest recorded employment score on the Chicago Business Barometer since 2009. So I like to say, with those metrics, it does not matter sort of what your priorities are. You could be the most far left progressive, or you could be just like a slash the government slash everything conservative at the city level, which we don't actually see that much. Most people think the city should provide things. For whatever you want, you need a growing business community. You need people coming to your city. That's how you fund those things.
Well, what's so interesting is that from my friend perspective, I think the vast majority of them are call it left of center, or in some cases even quite progressive, and they will be super passionate about, Kamala Harris or, anti-Trump. But when you talk to them about the city, they are as kind of right wing as you can get. And they'll say, oh, of course, Brandon Johnson is terrible. And of course, if we have to talk about economies, those policies are going to be terrible what he's implementing. And part of me is to say, look at where we are. Like, look at what has actually happened when you have a one-party system for this long. So, Austin, like, what do you think is kind of like the biggest lever that might start to turn this around economically?
Great question. So I like to think about a line that Warren Buffett talked about when investing in states. And he said, I'm not investing in Illinois because of the pension debt of the state of Illinois. Because what does that debt equal? Well, it's future tax hikes. If they're not going to take on government unions, it means future tax hikes on businesses. And we already live in a really high tax environment in the city of Chicago if you're a business. Chicago businesses pay the highest commercial property taxes in the country. It's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% effective rate on property taxes if you have a commercial building. In other words, you are paying the entire value of the building in property taxes over like a 20-year period. And that's so hard to pencil out for so many business owners. And you're talking big businesses. Get down to the small level. Like, small businesses really create most of the jobs in most cities, like employers with under 50 workers. That is so mired in red tape in the city of Chicago. And one of the things that sort of radicalized me, if you want to say it that way, in the city of Chicago is I worked with a lot of food cart vendors in the city. In 2016, I just wrote a piece actually for the Washington Post about why you can't start a Chicago-style hot dog cart in the city of Chicago. Like, the red tape doesn't allow it. And just scale that across every type of business. There's so many hoops you have to jump through, and it's a culture of people with political connections and power versus not. And if you do not have at least the ambivalence of local politicians, it's really hard to start and bootstrap and grow a business in the city.
But how did Brandon Johnson get elected? Because you have this diaspora of people who, even after Mayor Lightfoot had sort of, I think, by universally saw as a much worse mayor than Rahm Emanuel. And yet no one thought it could get worse than her. And we end up with Brandon Johnson. How does that happen?
Two factors. One is that he's backed by the most powerful political machine in the city. And Chicago, like I was telling you guys, sort of perfected the art of the commodity. We also perfected the political machine that started with Anton Cermak, who had sort of this ethnic ward-based patronage system, was evolved through Mayor Daley, the first Mayor Daley. He had tens of thousands of patronage workers working under him, leveraging federal money to give out, favors to politically important people. Then we had Madigan, House Speaker Mike Madigan in Illinois, longest serving House Speaker in the history of the country, leveraged debt. Like, to get back to that debt conversation, that exists because of Madigan giving out favors to government unions who would get out the vote for him. And now today, the biggest political spender in the city of Chicago, the biggest political machine, is the Chicago Teachers Union. And Brandon Johnson came out of that machine. They could have run anybody. They could have run Mickey Mouse, and they could have won that race because, one, they had the backing of this political machine. Two is we have elections when people don't vote. We are the only big city in the country that has our elections in February of off years. And it is an insidious form of voter suppression. It would be called voter suppression under any other circumstance. But that low turnout plus CTU is how Johnson became mayor.
So maybe before we zoom in on some of the points you made, can you frame the bear case and the bull case for us? So as you think about where Chicago can be in a positive environment, and we can then go into what it would take to get there. And if we don't do that, where does Chicago end up over the next 10 or 20 years?
That's a great question. So here's what we have going for us. Incredible talent pool. We are sort of the funnel that takes in all this amazing university educated talent across the Midwest. You usually are not going to want to stay, if you're hyper educated, hyper ambitious, in like Lansing. No offense to Lansing, Michigan. We are a real, true big city with all the cultural amenities that provides in the Midwest, which is amazing. Our infrastructure, really, really good. We have an enormous pool of fresh water that's, I think, right behind Ravin, if I have my geography correct. Lake Michigan is right back there. These are incredible assets. And what can we do? And what are our challenges? Going back to what I said earlier, and this is kind of the pessimistic case, but there's a kernel of optimism in it. All of our biggest problems are man-made. They're made by politicians, which means that the solutions are man-made. There's not a rain of locusts. We're not running out of water. There's not some crazy thing about Chicagoans in particular that makes our city, not function correctly. It is all a political problem. So what do we need to do? Make better decisions. We are in this really bad space. We're an outlier on debt. We're an outlier on public safety. We're an outlier in education because of bad decisions made over decades. So how do we make better decisions? That's the question. And I think there's three really important ways to do that. One is we have to educate people about that political machine. People need to know that the Chicago Teachers Union is the most powerful political entity, and their political views are far outside the norm for most working Chicagoans. And they are self-dealing, as we're seeing with Brandon Johnson. We can get into that later. That's number one. Number two, we need to look not just for a new mayor, although that is important, but we can't be waiting for Superman. A mayor alone is not going to save the city of Chicago. We need a system of government that is resilient to bad mayors. And that's how cities flourish over the long term. And we could talk about a solution set there, but that really goes towards looking what's successful in other big cities across the country. And I would love to go further into that. And then third, defeating voter apathy. We always say at the Chicago Policy Center at the Illinois Policy Institute, our biggest enemy is not a politician. It's not the Chicago Teachers Union. It is simply apathy. When you had Brandon Johnson go up in this election, who is clearly going to be worse than the current mayor, as Ravin said, we had 1 in 3 voters turn out to vote.
Okay,
That's apathy.
I'm loving this Austin Unchained, and I want to get you cooking on your second point that you wanted to double click into. I just want to highlight one thing. Chicago's mayoral elections are in the spring of off years when it is freezing. Think about what they're trying to do. That is not an accident. Like, it is insane that that is the case, that you would have, a freezing cold system like that. So just understand that that is not random. Now, back to your point about what you wanted to go further in terms of how Chicago can look at other great cities also.
Yeah, totally. So here's a really great example. It is the norm in many other big cities, not all. New York, for example, doesn't have this, but most other big cities have this. There's voter approval for tax hikes and new general obligation debt. You get to hike taxes as much as you want as a politician, but you have to make the case directly to voters about why you need the money and where it's going to go. In Chicago, we have more pension debt than 44 of 50 U.S. states, just as a city. No one voted for that. That was debt accrued over decades from politicians who never had to make a case to voters. It was behind closed doors with government unions who then funded them. So giving voters an actual seat at the table, I think it's not a conservative or a liberal idea. It is a good governance idea. So that's an example of just one thing we can take as a lesson from other big cities to get our finances in order.
So, I threw a fundraiser for my friend Alexi Janulius a couple months ago because a lot of people think he's going to run for mayor. I've been a supporter of his, for a while now. Austin, you came to that fundraiser and you were asking Alexi some tough questions about the budget. Let's just say Alexi wins, as I think he will. And let's say he anoints Austin Berg as, okay, Austin, we know you know all the problems. You also know what the obstacles are, from a city council perspective, from a Springfield perspective. How would you actually effectuate what you just said if you were given that sort of wand, but from a real practical perspective?
Yeah. So one example, and I think I talked about this, Ravin, when we were together, Chicago is also, when we're looking to other big cities, we're the only big city in the country that does not have the ability to restructure our debt through Chapter 9 bankruptcy. We're the only one in the top 10. And I'm not saying that a new mayor should run on a platform of let's go bankrupt. Like, no one's going to vote for that, right? Of course. And bankruptcy is extremely painful and we shouldn't root for it. But when you have 80% of your property taxes going to pensions, as is the case in Chicago, 80% of every dollar we pay in property taxes just goes to pensions, not to government or to services for people who need it. When that's the case, we need that option. So as mayor, you're going to need to work very closely with Springfield to give us that option. And it's not saying you need to go directly into bankruptcy, but when you're negotiating contracts, which is where our money goes when we pay taxes, it's contracts with unions. When you're doing that negotiation, you need to have some kind of leverage. And part of that leverage is we can go into chapter 9 and this is all going to be restructured. So you need to come to the table and be an honest person about this. Second, I think absolutely you run on giving voters more say on issues that matter. All we get to vote on in the city of Chicago, it seems like, is the next person to fill a suit. And they never fix the problems. It's been that way for 30 plus years. Give us real things to vote on. That means taxes and higher taxes and new debt. And it means, we haven't mentioned this yet, a city charter, a city constitution. All of these bad decisions over so many years are the result of us having no guardrails. Every other big city has a constitution with guardrails. Chicago doesn't. His legacy, or the mayor, the legacy of any mayor, could be just like their plaque is on the name of a big bridge or Maggie Daley Park or the Bean. They have the charter, which would be the greatest civic achievement in the last 50 years in the city of Chicago. That's where I would start. And you have to get people to buy in on that vision. But those are two places I'd start.
But so I agree with that wholeheartedly. That makes a ton of sense. And this is where I push some of my friends that have expressed an interest in running for mayor, is a little bit like the dog that catches the car. Because we run businesses. In a business, you always want to have the plan. Okay, like, here's what I need to do to make the numbers work, to ultimately get to profitability and grow. And this is the part I don't understand is Chicago, I think, has lost 100 billion of net worth in the last 10 years, some crazy number like that. Obviously, we can all think about folks like Ken Griffin that picked up and left, and they were the biggest philanthropists in the city of Chicago. He, I think, gave the money to build the separate bike path on the lake. He's gone. He's not donating to the city of Chicago anymore. The amount of income that the Citadel folks were contributing and taxable revenue to the city, is it solvable? Or do the numbers, are they just so bad that you would have to hit rock bottom and basically go bankrupt in order to come out?
Here's the great news about Brandon Johnson. He is the great uniter. And I think, Ravin, you've seen this on the ground, the level to which people have woken up with him being mayor, to the fact that these solutions are sitting around, right? And of course, change often happens when there is a crisis moment, when it's like, oh, we go to the bond market and we can't borrow. That happened in New York in the 1970s. If you guys remember the headline, Ford to City Drop Dead, that was because New York City was literally about to go bankrupt. And guess what? Today, the lessons they learned from that means that when Mamdani was elected, the spread on New York City government debt, it didn't widen. There actually wasn't a penalty on buying that debt because people know they have all of these institutional guardrails to doing crazy stuff financially that we don't have in the city of Chicago. So I think Brandon Johnson's administration, and people were critical of the last few administrations, there's been crises across all of them, are a wake-up call for people to change. I should add one more thing, though, to that new mayor, and this is politically the easiest thing to do. No new pension benefits. Governor Pritzker just signed a pension sweetener for Chicago police and fire. It's going to cost us billions of dollars that we don't have. The mayor was silent. And this is affecting all of his budget. So if you come in as a new mayor, you need to fight tooth and nail against that. We cannot afford to put more debt on young generations in the city of Chicago.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Okay, the ability to, declare bankruptcy as a vehicle, as a cudgel, to walk away during a negotiation. City charter. I don't know how Alexi or anyone else can run on that as a platform, right? That is not something that people are going to run towards, right? People vote based upon how a candidate makes them feel. Mm-hmm. And how would you sex that
voter
up?
I think it's don't forget the voter approval. So we should go into sex it up. This is like Queer Eye for policy. We're going to sex it up. We're going to zhuzh it all up. Okay. There's a lot of different themes you can do. One is stability. Everyone right now in the city of Chicago is talking about it is chaotic. We need stability and certainty going forward. That means on public safety, instead of having 8 different oversight bodies over the police department, we have one, like Los Angeles. Instead of city council and the mayor going behind closed doors and hiking taxes on us all the time, no more surprises, stability, it goes to voters. No more parking meter deals, no more property tax hikes unless you, the voters, decide, right? That's a theme that I think is unifying for the city of Chicago, is we want stability, certainty, safety in the city, and stop this chaotic form of government.
I want you guys to take a look at this, and we can talk about it.
Clear that the far right in this country, that they have not accepted the results of the Civil War, and that they have longed for a rematch to have a republic that subjugates and subjects individuals to a permanent lower class.
When we have a mayor who, at his core, believes what he just said, you think about crime and you think about education, which are two tremendous problems in this city. If you have to then zhuzh it up, okay, and you're running against that.
This is the new term we're gonna.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. How would you advise an Alexei, for instance, to contrast himself? Do you just think it's so apparent that you just stand there and don't say something as idiotic as that, or do you have to say something that's manifestly positive?
You have to sell. You need to sell a positive vision, of course. It's not. You're not going to differentiate yourself in a field of mayoral candidates by saying Brandon Johnson's not an effective mayor. Everybody knows that, and everybody's going to say that. But it's important to understand the reason why Brandon Johnson's saying that. It's because he is so unpopular. The only thing more unpopular than Brandon Johnson in Chicago is call it like the MAGA right. So he just needs to frame himself as the bulwark against the MAGA right. And that's his strategy to get reelected. So I think it's more about not focusing so much on that federal or culture war stuff. This is about providing public safety services for a good value. So, I won't pretend to understand what's the best for each different candidate to highlight, but I think it's really about, can we provide stability and great public services at a reasonable price? And that is not what we're seeing right now in the city of Chicago with public safety or anything else.
And you believe that if you get the right mayor and you build some of these systems and the city charter, that you can actually solve the pension problems and the financial problems of the city. And again, this is the math I haven't personally done, but based just kind of like the high level numbers I've seen, it doesn't compute.
There's two paths you can take. One is the political path right now, and no politician will say it out loud in Chicago or Illinois, but this is their strategy. This is what most of them think is going to happen. Federal bailout of our pension debt. And we saw a sneak preview of this. It was like a mask off moment during COVID when every other state was asking for ventilators. And like, if you guys remember, like the National Guard was even coming in to do some of that stuff. The Senate president of Illinois sent a letter to Congress asking for a $10 billion pension bailout during COVID, taking advantage of that crisis to just get a bunch of money in. I think that's a crazy idea to bank on. Why would you drive your car off of a fiscal cliff in hopes that the federal government, of all things, is going to save you? This Congress is not passing a bailout for Illinois or Chicago. A Democratic Congress wouldn't either. Right?
Well, let me ask you
That's
this.
one path. Go ahead.
Well, so when, Al, when we talk about the math of it, I think what a lot of people politically are going to say is we'll grow our way out of it. That's always the answer, because you see Trump saying the same thing vis-a-vis the $40 trillion of U.S. debt, which is, we'll grow our way out of it. Because you can make a spreadsheet that shows if population starts spiking up and businesses start coming back, you can grow your way out of it. So I just don't know. I don't know if that's realistic, or is it a combination of both, that
That's
you
right.
have to start growing and you take some austerity measures?
Well, also one thing we haven't talked about is the fraud. And I know this from just having observed it, having built a business to fix distressed apartments on the south side, west side of the city of Chicago. There's massive fraud in Chicago. I'm sure if you kind of look at the budget, the numbers have to be massive. Is anyone actually thinking about that, willing to go after it? How does that happen?
You can go to actually illinoispolicy.org. We're doing a series right now called Waste Watch that is essentially calling out all of these things. And no doubt there is fraud in Illinois. You just saw, like, almost every week, we're still seeing convictions for PPP fraud in Illinois from government employees, by the way, which is like crazy. That's, first of all, it's even taken this long. There's no doubt fraud. However, you got to think about the level at which it occurs. A lot of that is federal money. and you're not going to find sufficient changes in state and local government to really move the needle. We absolutely have to do it, and you have to call it out vigorously when you see it. And I think politically, it's a good thing to call out for sure. And it's part of building trust in government and people feeling like they're getting value for their money. So it has to be, top of mind. But like I said before, 80% of our property tax dollars are going to pensions. It's debt. Like the debt is the monster that's eating everything. And it's a transfer of wealth from the young to the old. And that's what it is in Chicago. That's what's eating the budget. And anyone who doesn't talk about that is not serious about fixing the problem.
I think that is the political line that Brandon Johnson is going down like the Titanic. Okay. There is no hope for that guy. But I think in terms of motivating the constituency to feel something, I think it's just what you just said, Austin, this idea that like, where is this money going? And when people actually understand that apathy might actually be overcome, and you might actually have let's just say it's Alexei, you might have a, greater than 51% at election. So there is no runoff. Yeah. So there's no dilution from a mandate perspective. Because I think what this city needs is a mandate. You need someone to come in saying, I told you I was going to do these 3 things, and now I'm going to do them. Say what you will about Trump, whether you love him or hate him. Okay, he made it very clear what he was running on, and he's now trying to do it. Again, whether you like it or not. Whoever the mayor of Chicago is, I would love it if they had some version of that passion you just had, talking about the financial unsustainability of this city and some actions that had to be taken, whether it was on a public safety perspective, from a school's perspective, just from a budget perspective.
That's right. So, and I should go back to those 2 paths I said, because Al, your question was good. Like, what are the options here? Like, can this even pencil out? One is we get a federal bailout, and then it's like the Fed prints money and then it gives it to Chicago. No. Of course, that would work if we could do that. And by work,
let's not put that on the table.
We should. With that argument, and Illinois has real issues. California now has significant issues that have accelerated with their asset seizure idea or the wealth tax that's driving a lot of the billionaires out of California. But a bailout can happen once, maybe if the stars align and you end up with full control of both houses of Congress and the presidency. But you're talking about an issue that's going to continue to get worse and worse.
What would prevent Illinois from going right back down the same path and driving off the cliff? Exactly right. So that's one, is we keep this horrible system, but now it's funded by every taxpayer in America.
Well,
that's one option. Go ahead.
Let's go point by point here. So let's focus first on crime, Austin, because that is something that people talk about. So if somebody said public safety in Chicago, you see headlines saying that Chicago is getting better. There was a big drop in crime. You have other people who, from, like a branding perspective, Chicago is so dangerous. What is your view on public safety in this city, and where do we need to go?
Goes back to the second sort of strategic imperative I've talked about. We need to lift our head up and look around to our peers for solutions. So yes, Chicago crime is going down. We have, I believe, a 60-year low in homicides. That's amazing. Like we should
60 or
60.
Okay.
And you better believe Brandon Johnson's going to tout that. Now, the extent to which anything he has done as mayor, how has that affected that number? That's completely up for debate. We also had a new state's attorney who was actually doing a good job of prosecuting crime. So that also should be part of the narrative of that decline. That's great. However, let's look around to our peers. Our homicide rate is still 4x New York and 2x LA. I might have those flipped. But we are far higher. Our homicide rate is so much higher than New York City and LA. And I think some of the reason for that, and this is, if I was running, this is what I would talk about. The management of the Chicago Police Department. The average Portillo's restaurant has better management practices than the Chicago Police Department. And you should be able to say that as anywhere on the political spectrum. And the evidence of that is actually in the consent decree. If you guys remember the murder of Laquan McDonald, there was a federal investigation, a long report on Chicago Police Department in practice violating the constitutional rights of citizens of Chicago. And in that, there is so much basic, both of you as guys who have run really successful businesses would be shocked at what was found in that report. No electronic records of performance reviews. No measurement of whether which training worked and which training did not. really basic stuff. And this is for a organization of tens of thousands of employees. And that's bad for the officers, by the way, not only, people on the street. That if you're an employee working in that environment, it sucks when management is bad. So basic things in the consent decree you can do to improve police governance. And then what I said before about community trust in police, I think that's really important. LA, post Rodney King, post Rampart scandal, was the most infamous, horrible police department in the country, really. And they turned it around through charter reform. And that included having a one-stop shopping for police accountability. They have a LA police board. It meets every single week. It hires the superintendent. It has an executive director. It's a simple system to manage police and public safety there. I think that's a great model for Chicago to follow.
One of the things that has impressed me about Alexei, if he runs, is he's doing a great job with Secretary of State. And what he'll tell you is, hey, look, I can't solve every problem myself, but I hire great people. And to the point about the cops, that is what you need. You need someone who is going to go in there and kick some ass and actually have the faith of the public.
Well,
So
I'll tell you on the police, and this is just disheartening. One of the reasons I ultimately decided to sell our real estate portfolio in Chicago, we had a big one, and leave, is we were supporting Rahm Emanuel when he was mayor. And I think Rahm did a great job of just galvanizing the energy in getting businesses to move. And he was building these control centers in various neighborhoods. And so we, through our foundation at Pangea Properties, decided to basically build one of these control centers. I believe it was in the 7th Ward or the 8th Ward. And they had technology to see where shootings were happening so police can respond quickly. You had, at that time, we didn't really have AI. This was the prior version, but technology to just help. And it had efficacy. And we gave real money to this cause. I think we gave $250,000 or something like that to build this. And then they just shut it down. And it's disheartening, this idea that it was working and it just was like, okay, well, we're gonna go backwards.
okay, so I didn't know you were going to go there, but since it's a coincidence, as you know, Al, last night I was at a Chicago Bulls game with a very prominent Black entrepreneur in Chicago who was one of the big champions of that exact program that you were talking about, who I believe actually got you to kind of, join, I think it was called Shot Stopper or Crime Stopper.
Well, ShotSpotter was a part of it, but that was one technology. But these control centers were
He and I were talking about this exact thing. And he said, Brandon Johnson just shut it down. And I said, why? And he used one word, wokeism. People thought that it was unfair. People thought that it was, somehow unjust, and they shut it down. And this is the kind of stuff that drives me nuts in this city. Like, I don't care what color you are. If you are committing a crime, you go to jail. And, there have been moments in the last few years where, my parents, when they retired, we got them an apartment in this building, 20 floors above us. And my mom, who's in her mid 70s, is this kind of, frail woman. And she wears a purse. And I say, do not walk down Michigan Avenue after the sun sets with that purse, because they take those things and rip, old ladies and, to the ground. We have incidences where good friends of ours at our school were carjacked at gunpoint in front of a fancy private school. And the two guys waved a gun in their face. And then these idiots who committed the crime were found on GPS hours later, literally at a movie theater. Okay. So the cops went in, arrested these people. They weren't even in jail for a few hours before they were released, because our prior state's attorney, Kim Fox, did not prosecute crime. It's like, what the hell?
Both of these stories are an encapsulation of what I would like to call, we have political policing in Chicago, not professional policing. The elimination of ShotSpotter, and for your listeners, that was a system of basically microphones that said, hey, shots have been fired over here, and it alerts those command centers, one of which you funded, Al, which is an amazing contribution to the city. That ShotSpotter data goes to those command centers. Professionals look at that, see if they can cross-reference that with any other activity they've seen. and then deploy resources to that scene. And it would save lives because oftentimes people aren't going to call the police. So there would be people bleeding out to death if there was not a shot spotter alert. Now, Brandon Johnson comes in, and this is one of, I would say, 3 reasons he's so unpopular. He is entirely beholden to the highly progressive political constituency of the Chicago Teachers Union. One of their number one goals, one of their top goals, I should say, was eliminating ShotSpotter because it deployed police. And of course, anything that deploys police into a neighborhood that has Black residents is bad, so they think. And that is an example of political policing that's not professional. And so that was eliminated by Brandon Johnson.
Well, because
Yeah.
our mayor thinks that we need to refight the Civil War. I mean, like,
Mhm.
it is insane in this city. I mean, I have another buddy who is very focused on crime in Chicago, and he basically says, there's a couple thousand people who are in and out of prison that commit basically all the crimes
Mhm.
in the city of Chicago, and in many cases, the police know who these people are.
I'll tell you, and this is just personal experience because we were buying all these distressed properties on the south and west side of the city in 2009, 10, 11. We had a bunch of people living in these buildings that weren't tenants. You had drug dealers, you had all these issues. So we brought in off-duty police officers to help us and marshals to help us just take control of these properties, evict the folks that shouldn't be there, weren't supposed to be there. And at that time, you could talk about, there's stories about bad police officers and people not doing their job. Our experience was these were people who were doing dangerous jobs and trying to help. At that time, the the bad guys, call it the drug dealers, the gang members, were afraid of the police. It wasn't like you were going in there and you were getting in shootouts, but they were actually afraid. This was 15 years ago. And then later, the police were then unwilling to help us in the future because they were afraid of the gangbangers. Because the drug dealers and the gang members would get into shootouts with the police because they knew that if they were going to get thrown in jail, they'd just get out. It was not even, it was just really kind of just an emotional, moral concept because they saw that they didn't have the backing of the city and what were they going to do?
A lot of people don't realize that Chicago, I believe, and Austin, you'll know this, if I'm wrong or right, is the most segregated large city in America.
Correct.
And so we've kind of arrived at this moment where the mayor, certainly Brandon Johnson, sort of feels like, do I support call it business community of Chicago, which is on Michigan Avenue and River North, and the way Rahm Emanuel was a big cheerleader for all the multi-billion-dollar corporations to come to Chicago? Or am I a mayor for the Black and brown people who are lower income on the south and west sides? And it's like, why do you have to make it a binary choice? It's completely insane. It is so racist from my perspective to believe that these Black kids and brown kids on the south and west side don't want to live in a safe neighborhood. It's like, are you nuts?
Well, again, our experience,
Insane.
our experience at that time was, at the end of the day, most people want basic things. Parents want their kids to go to school. They want them to feel safe. They want to get a good job. And all those things are interlinked. And so if you can create that environment, everybody prospers. But like you said, when you create friction points and you make it emotional, then there's no way that you get either.
There was this one day, I had a work meeting in the burbs, and I caught an Uber back, and it was this Black kid from the west side, and it was terrible traffic. We've gotten this hour-long conversation. And he was basically telling me, I drive Uber out here in the burbs because I'm from the west side, and there's a war right now between kind of the Black and the Hispanic areas, and I might get shot if I try to drive where I am. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm leaning forward. He had so many stories. And he said, number one, in my community, I'm single, and it's hard for me to kind of find a girlfriend because a lot of the guys with a lot of money are these gangbanger guys who deal drugs. They drop out of school. They're the ones, that are considered more attractive in a certain sense. And they know, to Al's point, if they get put in jail, they come right back out. Eventually, a lot of these guys get shot and killed. And it was such an insane story when he dropped me off. he parked the car and I brought him upstairs and he had dinner with my kids and my wife upstairs because it was just the most unbelievable first person story of about this kid did not have, a father. He was raised by his mother. He was as authentic as you could get from the West Side. You would think that he's like a political conservative when you talk about the guy. He's like, because they aren't doing anything bad to the people who actually commit the crimes.
That story is great, Ravin, and it highlights to me, even using that language like an equity lens, you can fight for much better solutions for those neighborhoods. So we talked about public safety, the clearance rate, meaning how many murders are actually solved in these neighborhoods. If you look at South and West Side neighborhoods, it's less than 20%. So if you're killing someone, the odds that you actually you have great odds to not get caught ever. So what do you think that does to trust in police when it's like, it's this vicious cycle of we lack trust in police, so we can't solve crimes, so it gets worse. Like that access to public safety is really important, especially on the South and West Side. And then your story too, Ravin, goes to education. We have educational redlining in the city of Chicago. We are the most hyper-segregated big city in the country. And from kindergarten through 8th grade, you can only go to that brick and mortar school that's in your little zip code. And that keeps kids in schools that are, in many cases, almost completely empty. We have a third of our schools in Chicago public schools less than half full. 1 in 3 schools, less than half full. Frederick Douglass on the West Side, built for over 1,000 students. There's about 30 students there and 30 staff today. Imagine being a kid on the West Side going into a building like that. What you can't even imagine. It's like this Kafkaesque, like David Lynch kind of movie. It's just an empty, cavernous building. I mean, what does that do to what you think about your future, your prospects in education? It's horrible. So school choice, by the way, is a huge important part of this equation, in my opinion. Every single child should be able to go to a school that works best for them, but they're stuck in these redlined schools and CPS right now.
So
Well, go ahead.
Austin, I think that's a great pivot. And I wanted to go here also is just talk about the actual public schools in the city. And you framed it, I think Rahm Emanuel got a lot of heat from certain circles for closing schools like that, but you couldn't go far enough because there was a strike and there was a deal with the teachers union. But currently, what is the state of these schools? You obviously have some of these selective enrollment schools in the city of Chicago that are really highly regarded, like Whitney Young and Maine Tech. And we had a guest on a few episodes ago talking about Stuyvesant in New York as an entree for kids that are immigrant kids or from poor households as a way for them to break out. And Chicago has that as well. But there's been pressure to dilute those schools, to dilute the programming at those schools. Where does that currently stand and how do we fix it?
I think the mental model around Chicago public schools under the current administration, and it's not just the current administration, this has happened before, is a line that he gave to an interviewer at the Chicago Economic Club right after he was elected. And the interviewer asked Brandon Johnson, as he was about to take office as mayor, how do you grade Chicago public schools? You were in the Chicago Teachers Union. You were a teacher for a couple of years in the system. How do you grade it? And Brandon Johnson said, my responsibility is not to grade the system. My responsibility is to fund the system. And that, in a nutshell, is the entire problem with the system, because you're not talking about what the outcomes are for the children it's supposed to serve. Instead, it's about the outcomes for the people who work in the system. That's what's prioritized. So right now, today, in Chicago public schools, you have more than half of Chicago public school students cannot read at grade level. 75% cannot do math at grade level. Meanwhile, and this number has almost doubled over the last 10 years, Chicago public schools spends about $30,000 per student per year. I mean, imagine the kind of private education you could get for that. And a lot of that money is going to empty buildings, like what we were talking about. And of course, it's painful to close a school building. It's such an essential part of a community. But you're not doing anyone any favors by shoveling kids into these empty buildings that are, of course, under-resourced, because I can't have a soccer team if there's 30 kids at my school, right?
Well, let's pause there and say again, Austin is anointed by a Mayor Janulius if he wins and says, you are now the education czar. Okay. What are you doing? Are you closing a bunch of schools? Like, how are you actually effectuating this?
You have to start with capital planning. Chicago Public Schools needs a 10-year capital plan. It is, I mean, Al, I would bring in people like Al who know the real estate industry and and how to assess a portfolio. CPS is a huge landowner.
Well, if you
And
want a strike on your hands almost immediately, you bring it.
we could bring in people like Al. We could bring in many different stakeholders, but people like Al who have that expertise should be among them and assess what's the best way to capital plan for the future of education. This is such a huge line item in our budget. We have so much land. How do we actually produce, how do we actually fund students and not just buildings? What we actually want to fund is students. So I think capital planning is a key thing. Another thing is we have to go down to the state and you have to make changes in state law because right now the Chicago Teachers Union holds public schools hostage. They've gone on strike 4 times over their last 3 contracts. And that is the result of, again, we're an outlier in allowing strikes. We don't allow our police to strike. We don't allow our firefighters to strike because it's a public safety concern. Having empty schools and kids not being able to go to school, that's a huge public safety concern. Most of the young people committing crimes are both out of school and out of work. So when you have a union that's able to use this political cudgel of leaving schools, depriving students of education, that is a public safety concern. So you can't allow teacher strikes. That's a huge thing. And you also need to restrict bargaining to what it was pre-2021 when J.B. Pritzker expanded it for teachers unions. Those unions can bargain over wages and benefits. All the other social issues that CTU wants to bargain over, you can do that with politicians on your own time. You cannot do that in your collective bargaining agreement. And finally, Ravin, this is really key, school choice. So right now in the one big beautiful bill that passed in 2025, there's a new program that gives federal tax credit scholarships for school choice. So people can contribute money and get a total federal tax write-off, and kids can use that scholarship money to go to a school that works for them. All Illinois needs to do is opt into that system, and we get that money for our kids to go to schools that are right for them. The mayor should be leading that fight to opt into that program.
Of course, we're talking about pensions and, penciling the math, but if you can actually reach all of these kids, whatever neighborhood they're in, South Side, West Side, North Side, and they actually get their own education and they themselves can actually bring themselves up if they've had a suboptimal family situation. That to me is absolutely the solution. So I could not be more passionate about figuring out a way to fix CPS. One of the things that frankly kind of made me allergic to wokeism was becoming a parent and seeing my kids going to school and they come home and maybe they have an assignment and you realize as a parent, well, if I do my kid's homework, obviously it's bad for the kid. Obviously it is bad for the kid. And when you start to see kind of like the language that Brandon Johnson drapes himself in, this morality about a fight between different races, and you see what's going on from a union perspective, and they are just screwing these kids.
My wife was a CPS teacher. She was a CTU member. And there's many great educators who they don't get into that field to get rich. I mean, you make a good salary as a CPS teacher, but they get into it to help change the lives of young people. The union's interests are not necessarily teachers' interests, and it's often at odds. Just for one stat, that union brings in $30 million a year from teacher dues. Just 18 cents of every dollar goes to representation of teachers in I have a grievance at my workplace, right? The rest of it goes to politics and other union leadership priorities. So I think it's important for all candidates to separate in the minds of the public CTU and Chicago educators. Those are 2 very different things.
I could not be more in love with teachers. Okay. Teachers to me are, the backbone of this country. And that's the irony, is that CTU has become such a sort of a villain. Like, what is the public approval rating of CTU in the city right now?
It's around Johnson. So it's in the 20s and it used to be 70% plus. Like when Rahm Emanuel was mayor, they would go on strike a lot. They were talking about running the union president, Karen Lewis, for mayor. It was 70%. Today it's in the 20s, 30s.
I mean, this is a longer discussion, but I think there's a whole point about why do unions exist for public workers? Because the history is unions served their purpose and created a lot of value for workers during the industrial age. But then ultimately you had private sector unions, and the private sector unions covered something like 60% of US employees. And then today they cover six. Because what happened? The unions really broke a lot of these companies. A lot of these companies went bankrupt. And then all of a sudden you got to the point where you have these public sector unions, which the concept, like it sounds great until you think about who are you unionizing against? You're unionizing to protect the workers against the politicians that you're then kind of voting into office. It's the concept is insane in my mind. But again, I agree with all this. I think we all agree with it. I just am failing to see how you enact it, given
Well,
all of the interests that are going to fight you.
one of the things I've become very passionate about is what's happened in Mississippi. I don't know if you followed that, Austin, but the
The
tech entrepreneur,
miracle.
yeah, the Mississippi Miracle, like Jim Clark, who founded Netscape with Mark Andreessen, he said, I got so goddamn sick of people thinking Mississippi was this backwater because it was like number 48 or 49 on every kind of socioeconomic metric. He put a ton of money into this program where I think it was at third grade. If you can't read and do math at a certain level in third grade, you have to redo the grade. And it created such an incentive that scores started to go up. And it got to the point where it was working so well that the state legislature got involved and they expanded the program. And now Mississippi has gone from the bottom to near the top at one of the most cost effective ways to do it, this Mississippi Miracle. The other side of that thing, the Mississippi Miracle, which is about what? Accountability. Okay. I learned about this through a liberal podcast called The Great American Math Crisis by Derek Thompson. And he says American reading and math scores went up from the 90s all the way through about 2010. And starting around 2010 to 2015, it started to go down and it's gone down and down till today. And they all cited one thing. It's called ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was enacted by Obama in his second term. And the point of ESSA was it relaxed the accountability of No Child Left Behind. So he allowed states to sign waivers to get off the accountability. And unfortunately, when you do that, what happened is you started creating all of these kids who were getting straight A's who couldn't do remedial math. Like it was completely nuts. You don't stop sickness by banning thermometers. Okay. Like you can't get rid of the thermometer and say that you're fine. And that's basically some version of what's been happening. I know I've been on this big rant here, but for God's sakes, put some accountability into the educational system.
Illinois, actually, you might be furious to know this, Ravin. J.B. Pritzker signed a law last year lowering math standards and reading standards for the state of Illinois because of stories year after year about so many students in Illinois not being able to read or do math at grade level. So instead of coming together with a Manhattan Project to increase the results, to better the results for Illinois children, the solution was, oh man, the test must be wrong. So we need to lower those standards. And it shouldn't be partisan. I think Josh Shapiro raised education standards in Pennsylvania. I think Jared Polis, Democrat, raised them in Colorado. But it's a really bad ideology to blame the test, which I'm sympathetic towards, right? Like standardization in this new economy, like is every amazing entrepreneur going to do really well at like standardized tests, and should they be tracked on that basis? Maybe not. Like, should teachers be paid on that? That's a whole body of research. Maybe not. But we see what works in Mississippi, and there's no reason not to copy what works. We don't have to create it from scratch.
So often, can we talk a little bit about just the state versus the city? And I've known JB Pritzker personally for a long time, and I like JB. I consider JB a friend. At the same time, I think you see JB constantly post that Illinois is the best state for business on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. or whatever may be the statistic of the moment. And not to be completely facetious, but there are a lot of these claims about how well Illinois is doing. But yet, I can't walk down the street in Miami without seeing someone that used to live in Chicago 5 years ago. So what is the state doing? How is it doing? How bad are the problems for the state of Illinois?
Chicago is kind of a microcosm of the problems plaguing the state of Illinois. And that one of those big problems is that we are a huge loser on net domestic migration. We lose people on net, not just to Florida and Texas. And oftentimes politicians will say, well, it's really cold in Chicago. No wonder we're losing. Well, then why do we lose on net to Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Kentucky, Iowa, all of our neighbor states we lose to? It's affordability. The taxes are lower. It's easier to raise a family, grow a business, and pursue the American dream in those other states. And that's been really frustrating to not hear the leadership really reckon with. And it's like blaming the thermometer again, Ravin. They'll say like, oh, they'll question the census estimates. They'll do things like that. My favorite example to bring up to folks who deny this as a problem, which the governor has denied it in the past or blamed the census as not being accurate, look at the projections for congressional representation. That's all politicians understand at the end of the day is how many seats are we going to elect to DC?
This is
Illinois is going to
this is the 2030 projection, right?
Yes, Illinois is going to lose 2 at least. Texas is going to gain 4. Florida is going to gain 4. A lot of these southern states are going to gain, and we're going to lose. Why is that? Because we're not growing. It's very simple. So it's the same story. Over indebted, incredible amounts of pension debt, worst pension crisis in the country. Taxes way too high as a result of that debt, and we can't deliver proper services, and people leaving as a result. And growth is a solution, and fairness and negotiations with government unions is a solution. Last thing on that, you guys, I talked about that federal tax credit program. Illinois was the first and only state in the country to kill a school choice program, and it functioned exactly like that federal program. It was called Invest in Kids, and it was a pilot program, and it allowed more than 10,000 low-income kids in Chicago and across the state to attend a school that was right for them. People would give to a scholarship fund, get a state tax deduction, and kids could access that fund. CTU went down to Springfield and said, we want this killed. And the governor did not lift a finger on that. And that to me was just inexcusable as someone who has funded so much great educational work in the past, but just like for some reason did not have the gumption to save that program for kids or to stop pension sweeteners. Like when rubber meets the road on those key issues, that's been disappointing.
One of the themes that I've thought a lot, and it's kind of in line with the thermometer example, is we've gotten to this point in society where we tell ourselves kind lies versus unkind truths. And I think that one of the things that X did when that kind of became very popular is it enlightened a lot of people like me who thought I knew the truth. I just thought I knew the truth. You know, I've read the New York Times and CNN, a little bit of The Economist, and you realize that, no, I didn't know the truth. And some of the truths are unkind. And I think that we have to get to this point where we're willing to say something that everyone knows to be true, but it may make certain people feel bad. I mean, Austin, what do you think in the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois? What is a kind lie versus an unkind truth?
The kind lie or misdirection is like Condé Nast is calling us the greatest city to visit in America for the 8th straight year. Therefore, I'm good at business. The number of flights into O'Hare, that mayor has kept saying this, the flights into O'Hare as somehow this newfound like key metric of the economic success of the state. Here's all you need to look at. Are we growing population faster than other states? Are we growing businesses faster than other states? It's very, very simple. And that rising tide lifts all boats. And if we can come down to that ground truth of how do we get our state growing again? How do we make government affordable again in Illinois? The solutions become a lot easier. But this misdirection around sort of, you know, we had a corporate headquarters move like 5 white collar jobs into an office in the Loop, and therefore we're business friendly. That has to stop. And I think it starts a lot with the donor class and folks who are close, really with a lot of those politicians and saying those unkind truths, which you guys are doing.
Well, and you know, people don't realize who don't come to Chicago. You come to this city in the summer, it's the best city in the country by far. I mean,
Amazing.
it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. Like, people don't realize there's a beach scene. You know, people are like, oh, give me a break. It is such a vibrant city, 4 seasons. I love this city. I'm so passionate about it. But here's the unkind truth. LA has Hollywood, it has the Pacific Ocean, it has all the celebrities. New York City is the financial capital of the world. Okay, so those 2 cities are plagued with a lot of the same things that we have, but they have more of a pull factor where there's a lot more attraction to younger kids, you know, graduating from college, and who are willing to deal with some of the chafe of it. And it's super important that Chicago doesn't get left behind because we put our head in the sand and just think, oh, we're never going to lose out to, you know, Columbus or Cincinnati or Milwaukee or
Houston.
in other cities,
Yep.
Houston,
Dallas.
in Texas. So I just want to ring the bell here. And maybe guys like Al and I have gone too far and people say, oh, you know, you guys are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Well, you know what? Maybe that's what's needed right now to at least, you know, ring a bell
Right.
and wake people up that, you know, we're going off a cliff.
Well,
If you go ahead, Val.
yes, sorry, also I want to hear your perspective. Sorry to cut you off there, but just to add to that, because I tend to be more negative maybe on this issue, I do want to say the positive side is having built 4 fairly large companies in Chicago. It is a great place to build a company. It's a great place because you have talent, like you said, Austin. You have amazing universities. You have obviously University of Chicago. You have Northwestern, University of Illinois, a lot of other great universities. It's pretty affordable. There's good public transportation, and you can just create this unbelievable nucleus here. But at the same time, the next entrepreneurs might not be here. And despite the fact that New York and LA have those draws, they're actually facing a lot of the same headwinds. Larry Page is now my neighbor in Miami, in Coconut Grove. Who would have thought that? If I told you that 3 years ago that the Google founders would now be living in Miami, nobody would have believed that. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for Chicago to reverse course, to improve. As someone that has hired thousands of employees in the city of Chicago, we still have, huge employee bases for Avant and for Stoke Lane in Chicago. I would love nothing more than for the city to reverse course and correct itself. Otherwise, it's just going to lose to Dallas, to Tampa, to Nashville. And at some point, it will be just irreversible.
That competitive spirit is, I think, what defines the city. Like, we need a 90s Bulls moment, last dance competitive spirit in Chicago. Like, we're not lacking for that. And I think, to your point, Ravin, if you love something, and I love the city, I will die here. And I believe it part of my mission to make it the same engine of prosperity that it was when my ancestors came here. If you love something that much, you have to tell the truth about it. And you have to tell just like anybody in your life that you love, you have to tell the truth, and that will set you free. So I'm encouraged that despite the sort of chaos and theatrically stupid nature of the current moment, it's actually motivating a lot of people to get off the sidelines and change things, which you saw in San Francisco, by the way. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that on your podcast. San Francisco is really going through, and the state's doing its best to kind of kill it with this wealth tax stuff. But San Francisco as a city really changed governance like on a dime and really made a difference for that city. We could have the same thing.
They changed the mayor, right? They brought in Mayor Lurie, I believe, and
Mhm.
and he's done the basics. I mean, I think people want the basics. It's clean streets and safe streets and kids in school, and that's it, right?
I think the people in Chicago are phenomenal. I think one of the problems that we've had is the political class wants to tell people that they are victims in order to gain votes. And they screw those people by putting this attitude in their mind that the world is against me. When in fact, the entire story of America is people, beating unsurmountable odds. And I think that Chicago, the people are just fine. It's that we've had a political class that just wants to say these things that sound really good and moral and empathetic, but it's kind of full of crap because the facts just don't bear out the morality that people are draping themselves in.
Amen. Yeah, I would encourage people if they are interested in just urban governance in general, and in Chicago specifically. I have a Substack called The Last Ward, like word, but ward. That's another outlier thing in Chicago. We're the only big city that has a thing called a ward, which is usually where you put like insane asylum, patients. But we have that. That's our basic political building block is the ward. So it's called The Last Ward. Over 100,000 subscribers now. That's the fastest growing by far newsletter on anything Chicago in the city, and it's growing really quickly. And you'll get stuff from me every Sunday morning there.
Yeah. So this is episode 12. Super excited to have made it to 12. We're trying to get to 21 and then beyond that. So your favorite book that you love or that you've read recently?
Mm. There's an amazing book called Music: A Subversive History that I'm just looking at on my shelf that I just finished. It's an incredible look at how innovation happens in culture, and amazing book, Music: A Subversive History.
Like,
Definitely not an answer we've gotten yet, so I like that. Your favorite movie?
Wow. Inglorious Bastards is up there. I'd have to put it there. I'd say Inglorious Bastards,
the
Tarantino.
first 20 minutes of that film are just so
What's your
amazing.
favorite character in Inglorious Bastards? Who is it? Is it Bear, the Bear Jew?
Verju's
No,
amazing. Aldo. It's amazing.
Aldo,
all, yeah,
Aldo,
I
Aldo.
and even, I saw this great interview with Tarantino when he talked about the scene where they were playing, the cards on their heads in the bar. And he said, most of the time when I write, you realize that the scenes are too long and you want to go shorter and shorter. He said, when I started writing that one, I realized that the tension here would be how long can I go on? Because I basically put this 40-minute detour with characters you've never even met in this bar. And it's such an amazing scene down there.
And this is a Chicago shout out. So Gene Siskel Theater, which is right across the street from the Chicago Theater, is an amazing place to see films. And this is the best. This is up there. This is what I was going to say instead of Inglourious Bastards, but it's barely a movie. It's like what Tolstoy is to literature. This is to movies. It's just so far ahead of everything else. It's a movie called Mirror by Andrei Tarkovsky, who did, Solaris and uh, Stalker, also one of my favorite movies. That movie will kind of completely blow your mind. But you can barely call it a movie. Mirror by Tarkovsky.
But when I had my midlife crisis after selling my business and I made my cheesy little feature film, we rented out the Siskel Theater 6 times to do test screenings because they allow filmmakers to do that. So it was very cool.
I thought this was the midlife crisis project, or maybe this is the.
This is your midlife crisis that I've decided to hitch my wagon onto.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And Austin, we've asked people, what do you do to stay fit? Favorite workout activity?
It's snowing right now, and one of my closest friends in college was a Finn, and I would go visit his family's farm in Finland all the time. So cross country skiing is my big one. Like I'm going to go out today in Chicago and go cross country skiing.
You and Alex Karp from Palantir.
Yeah,
It's
he's big into that, right?
He's really big. Yeah. No, this has been super fun and clearly just based on what you're reading and what you're doing. You're exceptionally diverse and thoughtful. It's super fun to have heard from you. Hopefully, others who are going to be running and will be in a position to change course are listening to you and watching you. And let's go Chicago.
Yeah,
Let's go Chicago.
this is a wrap on our 12th episode. I don't know if that's a word, our 12th episode. And please keep liking this on Spotify and on YouTube. Every single day we're getting more followers. And I think we had just like 100 or something on the first episode. And now there's a few thousand. So it's like 20x over 10 episodes. And to Al's point, we have heard that most podcasts die before they get to, I think, episode 21. So our goal is to get to 21 and see what happens. So it's going to be up to you guys to have us keep going if you keep liking and sharing the stuff. So thanks a lot. And we will see you all next time.